extra, extra. Read all about it. Jack the Ripper baffles Scotland Yard.
3 things made the Whitechapel murders a media sensation overnight. 2 murders back to back, an ensuing panic, and a letter which gave this mysterious blood-soaked slayer a name: Jack the Ripper. Dubbed the Soho murders, with a 3rd woman found strangled, Soho had become a byword for terror. With its victims so globally famous, only their nicknames were needed: Fifi, Marie, and now Leah. Syndicated worldwide on the 13th of September 1936. Every week was one of many articles that fueled the flames of panic and mystery. It read, like Jack the Ripper, this shadowy slayer of the girls of London's dim byways strikes with an insane but deadly cunning, leaving no clues to the famous man-catchers. Of those who fell prey to him, all were women, and all of the dubious class. Jack the Ripper threw such a shiver of fear over Whitechapel that women were afraid to go out at night. The same is true today of the women in Soho. With no witnesses, no clues, and no concrete evidence to convict separate suspects to these identical murders, let alone a serial strangler who stalked Soho's seedy streets, this mystery would spawn a myth, and with a 3rd murder fueling a panic, the press would give him a name: the Soho Strangler. Unlike the others, the murder of Dutch Leah would mark a shift in the killer's motive. But by making this man into a monster, once again, the victim would be forgotten. Leah's life was a fractured, chaotic mess. When asked, her own mother could not remember the date of her own child's birth. Just that she was born in 1912 at East Ham Infirmary in East London. Like so many women, Constance May Hind, as her birth certificate states, had many names for many legitimate and illegitimate reasons. With 3 different spellings of her surname, a married name, and combined with several first names, Constance, May, and even Leah, she had 8 known aliases. Lacking a solid role model, her early life was devoid of stability and love, as Leah was bounced like a bag of dirt. Between her mother Kathleen, an alcoholic fraudster who spent much of her upbringing behind bars, her father Gordon Bodley, a miner who was neither there at her birth nor much beyond, and when not being raised by her exacerbated grandmother Sarah Ann, who could do nothing for her, Leah was placed into care, far from her home of London. First at St Faith's House of Mercy, a convent at Loswell in Cornwall, and later at the Devon House of Mercy, a children's home in Bovey Tracy. Age 14, being legally entitled to flee the state's care, this broken girl from a fractured family, left with no money, no plan, and unsurprisingly, her mother would state she was unable to ever live alone. Between 1926 and 1930, her late teenage years, there is a gap in her past. Some say that she trained as a shorthand typist and then became a waitress. But with Leah Hines receiving the first of 8 convictions for soliciting age 18, by the time of her death, she had been a Soho prostitute for at least 6 years. Her adult life was no better, as every aspect of her existence was brief and transient. Like French Fifi, who it is unknown if she ever knew, as her name was never mentioned in the case file of her murder. Dutch Leah, as she was called, a moniker giving this Londoner an air of the exotic, was well known and well liked amongst her fellow sex workers, being chatty, pleasant and supportive. As a creature of habit, she worked from 9 p.m. till 2 a.m. She picked up punters behind the Palace Theatre, just south of Old Compton Street and on the corner of Romilly Street and Greek Street. And she kept close ties to her trusted associates, Leah Cohen, Ruby Walker and Lily Joyce, the last people to see her alive. Like many prostitutes, her clients were either faceless strangers or nameless regulars. Her arrests were as common as the violence she endured, none of which led to convictions. She charged a flat rate. She rarely haggled over a fee. She had no issues with getting naked. And as many men refused to use the thick rubber condoms as supplied by Sydney Bloom, they could pay her for unprotected sex, as their semen would be soaked up by the thick wads of cotton wool she regularly inserted into her vagina. In the police report, she is described as a common, low type of prostitute. There was nothing about her which stood out, being just a small, plain, and unremarkable woman struggling to get by in a life which had dealt her a dirty hand. In short, she was no more likely to be murdered than anyone else. Just like Fifi and Marie. Leah's mother would state, "She always lived with some man. I don't mean that she lived with a man who kept her, but a Ponce." Like many aspects of her life, her lack of steady lover may seem scandalous to 1930s morals. But living in an era where a single woman was seen as sinful and penalized to the point where it was better to live with a man whether she loved him or not, like Marie Cotton, her happiness was never considered. In 1930, around the time of her first conviction, she lived on Whitfield Street in Fitzrovia with Jim Rich, a black music hall artiste who performed in the West End as well as touring the UK. By all accounts, they got on well and they never quarrelled. But after 2 years, the couple split. In 1931, Leah met Robert Smith at a dance on nearby Newport Street, with him always believing that she was a waitress. By the end of the year, they had a child. "I think it was a boy," her mother would state. But unwilling or unable to care for him, he was adopted, but I don't know by whom. On the 29th of June 1933, Robert Thomas Smith and Constance May Hind married at the Strand Registry Office under the aliases of Robert Thomas Armstrong and May Constance Hind. But by August 1934, after just 1 year's marriage, she wrote and told me she was leaving, with no reason. In December 1935, she lived with an Italian known only as Alf, above G's Fish Shop at 65 High Street in Bloomsbury. By January 1936, she lived with a Frenchman using the alias of George Day at 40 Greek Street in Soho. And by February 1936, she lived on New Compton Street with William Billy Sullivan, until his arrest later that month for theft and assault. Following her murder, the police wouldn't seek a serial strangler whose sadistic spree had slain another sex worker, or a sensational monster whose very name made worldwide headlines. As once again, their suspect was the most obvious one, like one of her criminal lovers who leached off her earnings. Stanley Gordon King was born on the 29th of July 1912 in Aldershot. With his father having died when he was just a toddler, he supported his mother as a minor, but in 1931, aged 19, he came to London to work various jobs, as a hall boy, a footman, a waiter, an MC at Max Dance Hall, and finally as a street magician. Under the stage name of Rex Gordon, 24-year-old Stanley performed from mid-afternoon until late into the night, on every tourist street and seedy night spot, always struggling to earn enough to pay his way. Being small and unimposing, he was an unlikely suspect to strangle his lover with his bare hands. But as Leah wasn't overpowered with brute force, her ligature strangulation was more likely to come from a man with nimble fingers, a swift sleight of hand, and an encyclopedic knowledge of ropes, binds, and knots. Dressed in black, a colour on which blood is hard to see, taken into evidence from the crime scene was his magic bag, a conjurer's kit which contained everything needed to pull off the ultimate deception, like cloths, ropes, and lockpicks. Interviewed about the murder weapon found in his own flat, Stanley would state, "I had about 3.5 yards of electrical flex. I saw it 9 weeks ago. The piece of wire shown to me is not my property. I have never seen it before." Like the others, Stanley had criminal convictions, but they were only slight. Under the aliases of Arthur King and Archibald King. In February 1935, he was charged but not found guilty of stealing a car. And in June 1935, he pleaded guilty to insulting behaviour and a breach of the peace by fighting in the street. Stanley hardly seemed like a maniac, the kind of crazed killer who would unleash such horrific levels of violence against Leah. And yet, if they were connected, make the murders of Fifi and Marie look like an accident and a suicide. But then again, everybody has secrets, everyone tells lies, everyone has limits. And maybe the reason her crime scene looked so similar and yet different was that Leah's murder was personal. On an unspecified date in April 1936, in the Caprice Club at 59 Old Compton Street, Stanley met Leah. Within the week, they had moved in together. but their affair was born as much out of love as it was out of lies. Stanley would state, she said her parents were German. She said her name was Leah Hines. And hiding the fact that she was still married and had a child. Her biggest lie was how she earned her money. On the 24th of April 1936, they moved into 2 rooms on the first floor of number 1 Little Portney Street, just off Old Compton Street. An area riddled with prostitutes, pimps and brothels. After 3 days, she told him the truth. She said she was going out and meeting men. I said, "You're not bringing men here, are you?" She said, "Yes." She promised me that she would not bring any more men back to the place while we were there. Whether Stanley was oblivious, an idiot, or a liar is unknown, as there is no denying what Leah did for work. She had prior convictions for soliciting. Everyone on the street knew that she was a prostitute. She worked from 9 p.m. till 3 a.m. Her handbag was full of condoms. She picked up men just 1 street away and brought them back to their flat, where often Stanley would find their coats or hats left behind. Whether this was an alibi or ignorance, he also claimed that Leah had the only key to the door, and that if he wanted access to his own flat between her working hours, he had to wait for her to throw the key from the window or sit in a cafe until she came back to the flat. On Monday the 4th of May 1936, 5 days before her murder, Leah and Stanley moved into a new lodging at 66 Old Compton Street. A few doors down from their old flat, deeper into the heart of Soho's sex trade, and it was rented off a landlord who knew that she was a prostitute, having previously tried to evict her for non-payment. 66 Old Compton Street was unnervingly similar to 3-4 Archer Street and 47 Lexington Street. Set on a bustling thoroughfare, which thronged day and night to a cacophony of life. Amidst the hum of pubs and clubs, market stalls and small trades, gambling dens and secret brothels. Off Shaftesbury Avenue or Charing Cross Road, a stranger could easily enter this street, unseen and unheard, and then vanish. As a very similar flat-fronted 4-story building, it was yet another almost perfect murder location. With a provisions shop called Fratelli on the ground floor, the lodgings above were only accessible by a street door, often left unlocked and open until the tradespeople had gone home. Described as dilapidated, its smattering of tenants kept themselves to themselves and rarely saw one another. In the basement lived a bookmaker and a variety artiste, who were rarely in before midnight. On the first floor, Shaw the seamstress was usually gone by early evening. The third floor was unoccupied, and on the second floor lived its newest tenants, Stanley a magician, and Leah a supposed waitress. For a prostitute, the dark unlit stairs gave her slew of faceless punters, the privacy to sneak in, get sex, and then vanish like a gust of wind amidst an oblivious crowd. It was discreet, but it was also a place where tears fell unseen, cries were swallowed whole, and a scream of death would be lost amidst life. Their room was small and basic. A double bed, a dresser, a wardrobe, the lights lit by a gas meter, and several odds and sods left behind by a lazy landlord, including one of the weapons used to murder her. Just like the others, Leah's final days and hours alive are unremarkable. Sunday the 3rd of May, Leah met Kathleen, her mother, for the very last time. She told me she was living with a conjurer. She said he was kind to her. She seemed happy and did not complain of being afraid of any person. Of those who knew Leah well, she never made any reference to being harassed, bullied, or blackmailed. She'd recently been assaulted by a punter, but no more than usual. We don't know if she had a pimp, if Stanley was her ponce, or if her landlord was a flat farmer, part of a criminal gang who rented out rooms to sex workers at inflated prices and took a cut of their earnings. And she never spoke of white slavers, dope peddlers, sinister stalkers, or a violent Jew called Mr. Cohen. Monday the 4th of May. Stanley and Leah moved their belongings into 66 Old Compton Street, including his magic bag. Knowing her past, Stanley would later claim he had implored her, "Will you promise not to bring anyone here?" Meaning men. She said yes. As usual, they ate dinner together. "I left her about 11 p.m, Stanley would state. "I arrived home at 3:30 a.m. and found her dressed and waiting." Tuesday the 5th of May. Of that night, Stanley would state, "That evening I was at Shea Bobby's club until 1:15 a.m. Back home, she was waiting up for me. I asked if she would give me a key to the street door. She said, 'I need the key. If you want one, you must get one cut.' I became suspicious and thought she was bringing men back to the room." They later made up with each other and stayed in bed till 3 p.m. Wednesday the 6th of May. Having performed at the club, Stanley arrived home a few hours earlier than usual, although it is unknown whether this was due to business being light or his need to catch her out. With supposedly no key, I arrived at 12:30 a.m. I whispered up. She threw the keys out of the window. I let myself in and found her waiting. Of course, the only witnesses who can confirm this are Stanley and Leah. Thursday the 7th of May. Having ate a late supper, I left her at 11 p.m. by Tottenham Court Road Police Station. I expected her to go home. Having left Shea Bobby's at 3:30 a.m., I arrived at 3:45 a.m. and whistled up as usual. I received no reply, and after walking around, I returned to the address at 4 a.m. and noticed she was looking out of the window into Old Compton Street. She was fully dressed and wearing a hat. I said to her, "Where have you been all this time?" She replied, "Are you trying to catch me?" Stanley would later state that she had been to the Caprice Club, a place he had forbidden her to return to. She said, "I've been out of someone's way for a couple of hours." She went to the dressing table and took out a seaman's discharge book. The seaman was never identified. His discharge book was never found. And according to Stanley, Leah never stated why it was there. Friday the 8th of May was Leah's last day alive. Stanley would state, "I woke up at 11 a.m. and noticed a blue raincoat on top of the wardrobe. I asked her about it. She said, it's always been there. I knew this was wrong and I told her so. She said, oh, well, the man who was here last night, it belongs to him. I said, he must have been in a hurry. It was 3 o'clock when I left the room. And according to him, I asked her if she wanted to meet me for supper. She said, no, I'll see you tonight. She asked me to be home, definitely at 2 a.m. But in Stanley's own words, that was the last time I saw her alive. That night, there were several reliable sightings of Leah. Leah Cohen, a fellow prostitute and her old flatmate, saw her at 10:50 p.m. on Old Compton Street and stated, she was alone. When I left, she was dressed in a small dark hat, a fawn coat and a blue spotted frock. At 11:30 p.m, Ruby Walker saw her at the corner of Charing Cross Road, talking to Ginger Joan. She said, I haven't been off all night, meaning she hadn't had a punter, and there was no money coming in. The last confirmed sightings of Leah were at 12:30 a.m. The first was by Emilio Plantino, a hall porter at the London casino, who saw Leah walking east on the south side of Old Compton Street with a man. And just minutes later, Nellie Few, a local prostitute who had known Leah for 6 years, saw her enter the street door at 65 Old Compton Street with a man matching that description. With no one left in the building, except for the sleeping lodgers in the basement, what happened next was only witnessed by Leah and her killer. In comparison, Stanley's sightings are less accurate and cannot be verified by others. When questioned by the police, he would state, I went to Chez Bobby's, 1 street east on Charing Cross Road, and I stayed there until 3:30 a.m. Even though, according to him, Leah had asked him to be home definitely at 2 a.m. At 4 a.m, with the street door locked, I whistled up but got no reply. Stanley later stated, I went to Jack's snack bar on Charing Cross Road and had a cup of coffee, although the owner could never confirm this. Returning at 5 a.m, he rang the bell, which was unheard by any other lodger. I again returned to the address at about 6 a.m, but again no reply. Seemingly unconcerned, he went to a cafe at the High Street in Bloomsbury, even though one was open immediately opposite. And at 6:30 a.m, he told a passing labourer called James Adams of his issue. And after a little breakfast, this convenient witness agreed to help him. At 8:45 a.m, with a provisions shop on the ground floor opening up, Stanley got a second witness, Mr. Fratelli, to unlock the street door. And hearing Leah's puppy whining inside their flat, he got James to break down the door. Discovering her body, Stanley ran to the junction of Great Windmill Street and Shaftesbury Avenue and reported to PC Davidson. "Oh, Constable, will you come along? I think my girl has been murdered." Stanley King was said to be visibly shaken and upset. The crime scene was unnervingly similar to the two previous killings by the Soho Strangler. Inside, there was no state of disorder. The drawers were not ransacked, and except for Leah's black handbag, which had been left open on the mantelpiece, a robbery could neither be proved nor disproved. Again, Leah hadn't feared a killer. As lying obliquely on the bed, with her stockings neatly rolled down to her ankles, her knickers removed, her legs widely parted, and her cotton dress pulled up to her waist, leaving her pubis exposed, she had prepared herself for the purposes of sexual intercourse. Only once again, there were no signs of any sexual assault, as her undressing was of her own volition. Again, the killer had fashioned a found item, as a piece of black flex was tied around her neck. Only it wasn't the strangulation which would take her life, as with the scene described as the work of a maniac, his usual calmness cast aside, and having grasped a second, much deadlier weapon, he had unleashed an unparalleled fit of violence and anger upon her, as if Leah's death was personal. With Dr. Charles Burney and Home Office pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury jointly confirming that she had died between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m., they both took a unanimous opinion: this was a murder. The police's prime suspect was Stanley King, a man with a method, a motive, and a very tenuous alibi. But was he her killer? Or with two strikingly similar unsolved murders across neighbouring streets over a few months, and with a third heading that way? Once again, had the police collared a very convenient scapegoat, rather than face the unthinkable, that the Soho Strangler was stalking their streets? Part 6 of 10 of the Soho Strangler continues next week. Whoa. I'm gonna have a celebratory water. There's Coot being an annoying prick. Utter bastard. Well, it's fine. It's fine, Coot, because I've finished now, you little shitbag. Oh, they're being... It's like there's two of them, there's a little family of them out there, and they come and say hello to me and go, "Oh, give us some food." And then there's some more hens. And the Coots are really stupid. It's like you throw out some food for them, and instead of going after the food, they spend all the time chasing away all the other birds, going, "Get away from my food." And by the time that the Coots have come back to the food, all the food's gone. They're really, really thick. It's like when you see them on the towpath and they're sunbathing on the towpath, because the towpath is black and they're black. Unfortunately, you tend to see quite a lot of Coots that have been a bit mashed up. because cyclists have run over them, and it's just like it's like the other side of the canal is green. Go and sit there. No one's cycling on that bit, but they don't. They go, I know. I'll just have a sleep in the path. Utter bellends. Anyway, welcome to Extra Mile, unscripted, unedited, blah 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 blah. Quiz in a bit. Dive into some extra stuff. I'll try not to ruin what's going to happen in next week's episode. Let's pop on a herbal tea. Let's see how much of this herbal tea I actually drink. I'm going to open up some windows. Oh, yep. Coot is now harassing a moorhen opposite and trying to act like he's not harassing. Utter little shitbag. There we go. That's on. Just found out that today is Shrove Tuesday, aka Pancake Day, and me do like pancakes, so me might go and treat myself to some pancakes tonight. What's going on? Let's dive into some stuff. New Patreon supporters to thank. As I'm powering through these episodes, we're getting further away, so I'm sorry to everyone who's Patreon supporting. You have to wait a couple of weeks to hear me say thank you. It's because I'm powering through them at the moment. So thank you to Zanti and Terry Fremantle. So thank you, Zanti and Terry Fremantle. Thank you very much. Also thank you to Lucy Barr and Selena Dean for your very kind birthday donations. Very kind. I haven't told Eva about them because she'll only spend it on super strength lager and 170% proof vodka, which is basically made out of battery acid and shit like that. So I haven't told her about that. I'm going to keep it for myself, but I did use some of it because I was out last night with the original, the only Police Constable Arsenal Guinness, which is very good. We did some nice boozing. It's always weird because he'd just woken up from a night shift. So he'd just woken up, turned up, and we went out down the pub. That must feel really weird. But no, that was really good fun. We enjoyed that. It's lovely to see you again, PCAG. We had a good giggle. Thank you. I apologise. This happened ages ago. On one of my last tours, there was a lovely couple who came up and they'd made some Police Constable Arsenal Guinness stickers, and they gave me 2, so it was 1 to me, and I promised that I'd give 1 to Police Constable Arsenal Guinness. Last time I saw PCAG, I didn't have them with me, so they've been sitting there for a while. But finally, PCAG got his very own PCAG badge, and he was very excited about that. So thank you very much for making that exclusive PCAG badge. Lovely. What else is going on? It's Pancake Day, as mentioned, so we're still in February. Johnny, who's one half of Cult With No Name, it was his birthday just gone. And we've got birthday drinks this weekend coming up, so I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be very good. I haven't seen JB in must be about 3 years now. So yeah, all busy. What else is going on? As mentioned, the coots and moorhens are being twats. I've had a turtle in the water yesterday. Those turtles in the canal, I don't think they're native. I think they might have been released, but they seem to survive. But this one seems to have passed away. R.I.P. What else is going on? Not a lot. All I seem to do is doing this, which is good. My brain is a bit fried. Halfway through the series, brain is a bit fried. These cases are about to get more complicated. All the different pieces that are in there are going to start weaving together, and it's, oh my god, and especially because there's nothing out there. Even the little interview I did with Dom from Soho Bites podcast before I met up with Dom, I think that should be out by the time you listen to this. I'll put a link in the show notes. Hopefully that'll be in there. Dom was like, I went to do some research about the Soho Strangler before we did our interview, and he went, there's nothing out there. And I was like, nope. And he's like, there was bits out there, but I think it was yours. It's like, yep, but I deleted it. So yeah, there's nothing out there, but we'll see. This is one of those cases because there's nothing out there, and because unfortunately there's a lot of not just podcasts but also documentary series where they do very little research. I'm interested to see what happens with this afterwards, because post Blackout Ripper, a lot of podcasts picked up on Blackout Ripper. After I did my Thames Towpath Murders and Morbid picked it up. Have a look. It's interesting. Morbid did that because they're like super famous. lots of other podcasts are like, oh fuck yeah, we'll do that. So basically they're just ripping each other's material off. It's piss poor, isn't it? People not doing research properly, just nicking other podcasts, and not a good thing to do, especially if you don't give credit to it as well. So we will see. Let's see. I am kind of looking online regularly, typing in Soho Strangler just to see if anyone's picking up on it. No one has yet, but we'll see. There'll be a podcast out there who'll do a one-parter, and it's like, oh, don't even effing bother. Don't even effing bother. My tea is almost done. I probably won't drink it. There we go. Just an herbal tea, which is good for relaxing the eyes. There we go. I think it's an herbal. Oh dear. Right. Let's do the quiz questions. Let's power through those and dive into some extra stuff. So, question number 1: in which part of East London was Leah born? Question number 2: what did Leah's dad, Gordon, do as a job? Ooh. Question number 3: in what town was Stanley King born? Question 4: what was Stanley's stage name? Let's see, here's some relatively difficult ones. Don't forget, I haven't edited this episode yet, so some of these questions might not appear in the episode because I might edit them out. Question number 5: on what street? In what street did they yawn? On what street did they first move in together? So that's Stanley and Leah. On what street did they first move in together? Question number 6: in which 2 counties was Leah placed into a care home as a child? Question number 7: what colour was Leah's handbag? Question number 8: what was the name of the coffee stand that Stanley said he got a coffee from before he found Leah's body? That was 8. Number 9: Emilio Plantino, one of the last people to see her alive, worked at what casino? And question number 10: at the back of what theatre did Leah pick up her punters? Right, let's dive into some extra stuff. So, Leah, birth name Constance May Hind, Hind. She's 24 years old, roughly. Obviously, we don't know her date of birth because our mum didn't know her date of birth. She used different spellings of May, M-A-E and M-A-Y. She used different spellings of Hind, H-I-N-D and H-I-N-D-S. She also used Heinz, H-E-I-N-Z, and said her father was German, which he wasn't. She went by the name Leah, hence some people called her Dutch Leah. She wasn't Dutch, she just kind of used it. Unlike the French prostitutes who are out there who use the term, well, most people call them French Fifi, and she used Dutch Leah. Gave her a bit of kind of something different, but she wasn't Dutch at all. Let's dive in. Her father, he seems to be a bit wayward, so it's hard to prove whether he was her father or not. He was not living with her and her mother when he was born. Her father and mother got back together when she was about 2 years old, so that's 1914. They stayed together on and off until she was 13 years old, but Leah didn't live with them. She was brought up by her grandmother, Sarah Ann, who by the time of Leah's murder was about dead. Her father left her mother in 1930 and she's not seen him since. Still trying to piece together pieces about her mum. Her mum had kind of a long rap sheet of criminal convictions. Her first one in 1909. She, around the time, just before the murder, so about 3 years before the murder, she was tried at the Old Bailey for blackmail. She was just released just before the murder happened, and she was living just around the corner, so they really didn't see each other that much. They didn't seem to get on that well either. As with the other victims, Leah was petite. She was about 5'1", brunette hair in a bob. Like many of the others, well, she was they describe her as thickly built, but I think that just means she's she's not large, she's not fat, she's just got a little bit of, like all of us, a little bit of chunkage on her. Not wrong with that. It keeps you warm in winter. Skinny people will die off in winter. People with a bit of chunkage on them will last longer. What else we got? Her uncle Edmund, who was Kathleen's brother, her mother's brother, described her mother as a well-known criminal who had various offences for blackmail and was described as not a good mother. While diving in, I did some research on where she, the various care homes she lived. We won't dive into that because obviously that's one of the quiz questions. Even the uncle himself, it's like she had no childhood, she had pretty much no love. The uncle said he had not been in touch with Kathleen, his sister, or his niece, who was Leah, for about 11 years. So the family is pretty much splintered. Mother stated she was trained as a shorthand typist, that was Leah, and that she also became a waitress. She may have done. This may have been how she started, because we've seen it a lot in a lot of these cases before, and other cases where women aren't. There's a lot of women who aren't full-time prostitutes, but they have a job, and because the job pays extremely badly, they kind of make up the rest of their income with prostitution. And as we've mentioned before, it's kind of a big word, is prostitution, but it can mean having sexual intercourse, it can just mean sexual acts. There's also escorting, which is entirely different as well. So it's it's hard to pin down. The problem in that era, on the police records, it would just say prostitute, but it doesn't differentiate any of that, so it's hard to really work out the difference. Leah's first criminal record was under the name of Leah Hines, that she was doing. Obviously, in order to kind of hide your past from the police, a lot of prostitutes would use different aliases, change their kind of how they look, so they wouldn't look like they did on the pictures on there, but because they had their fingerprints, police could still track them down, so they were able to go, Leah Hines is Constant May Hines. Her first conviction was in 1930. She had 8 convictions for soliciting. Unfortunately, her criminal record was not in the police file. Neither was Stanley's either, so I've had to, as with the others, piece it together by what I could find. She kind of lived day to day. She had no savings. She kind of living a hand-to-mouth existence. She accrued a lot of debts, and she kind of moved on from temporary lodgings into temporary relationships. It's kind of, an unsatisfactory life. Nothing seemed to be solid for her. Whether she, because of her upbringing, maybe she didn't want solid, or maybe she feared kind of solid relationships, so we don't know. But one stability was prostitution in her life. Not to say that was a good thing for her, but it seemed to be the one thing that was consistent. So she was a prostitute for 6 years. She was well known in Soho. She had her regular patch where she picked up the punters. Almost all of her friends were kind of prostitutes as well. So they kind of, as we've seen with Fifi, they kind of looked after each other. She had a lot of boyfriends. All of them seemed to be ponces, people who were kind of... She liked creatives, but a lot of them were low earners. Most of them had criminal records. They kind of would sponge off her. So whether they were her pimps, we don't know. Whether she had a pimp, we don't know. It's all kind of an odd one. Let's dive into some more... Stanley's criminal record is a bit light. He definitely had more convictions than I could find, but these are the only ones I could really hunt down. So February 1935, him and a mechanic called John Brown. Stanley was 21. He was they say he was 21. He wasn't. He was 23 by that point. Well done, the press. They were found asleep in a car with 2 girls near a golf course in Perryvale. They were charged at Marylebone Police Court with stealing a car from Bayswater. John Brown, who he was with, went on to deny that he'd stolen the car. He'd said he was in Lyons Cornerhouse tea room with 2 girls when he was offered a lift. Stanley King was discharged at the magistrate's court because they couldn't prove that he was lying. Another one, June 1935, David Forsyth, who was a painter of Sydenham and Stanley, a magician living on Goldhawk Road in Shepherd's Bush. Both charged with insulting behaviour and breach of the peace in Denby Street in Pimlico. Forsyth pleaded not guilty. King pleaded guilty as they were fighting in the road, and they were charged 5 shillings. Stanley King pops up in the press in 1954. Still working, I won't say his stage name because that's one of the quiz questions. He was still working as a performer, still going under the name of Stanley Gordon King was his name, and he was working with his business partner, Lois Kathleen Cecilia Strong. She was known as Lois Lawrence. They ran a small company called Gordon Lawrence Productions, which is based out of 10 to 11 Great Newport Street, which is just by Leicester Square Tube Station, and they were listed in the Stage magazine. So 20 years on, he's still doing his thing as a magician. Let's see if we've got time to dive into Stanley's statements. Let's whiz through these. Hang on, are these his statements or not? Yeah, Stanley. Okay. So I'm just reading ahead. Let's dive into it. Let's read as much of his statements as we can. He gave a couple of statements. What I'm cautious of is, because we're going to use bits and pieces next week, because we're covering another angle on this on Dutch Leah's murder. So there's a lot that I kind of want to make sure that I don't ruin a lot. Stanley would say, after 3 days living together, she told me she was not working as a waitress, but was getting her money from her mother. Leah would claim that her mother had loads of money in the bank for her. That was not true. I told her I did not believe this and said that I thought she was on the streets. She then said that she was going out and meeting men occasionally. I said, "You are not bringing men here, are you?" She said, "Yes." I said, "I will leave you unless you get another place for us to live." She said she would. I said it must be away from the West End, and she said she would. So this is weird. I didn't put this in the episode because sometimes things really confuse it, but he denies that he knows that she's a prostitute. He says he kind of thinks that she's bringing men back, but doesn't really mention the fact that she's a prostitute. He says, "I'm unhappy with this. Okay, I want you to get us another place to live." So you can clearly see with that she's the one with the money. She's the one organising this. He's kind of pouncing off her, really. But they're living on a street, which is, I'm not going to say the name of it because it's one of the quiz questions, but it's an intersecting road to Old Compton Street. So Old Compton Street and the streets around it. So Archer Street, Rupert Street, a junction of Wardour Street, all full of kind of prostitutes, brothels, things like that. And he says, I want us to get away from all this. And what does she do? She rents somewhere that's just a tiny, like a couple of doors away. And he's like, "Yeah, fine, this'll do me." She promised me that she would not bring any more men to the place while we were there, and I continued to live with her. She used to stay in bed until about midday, and on most afternoons I went with her shopping and to the pictures. Sometimes I would leave her in the street at about 6 o'clock, and other times I would go back to the rooms for tea and leave her there. She used to come home about midnight or the early hours of the morning. So he says that he doesn't know what she does for a living. He denies that he knows that she's a prostitute, but it's like, I mean, he seems to be the only person on Old Compton Street who doesn't know that she's a prostitute. It's like everyone knows that she's a prostitute. The guy who worked at the casino knew that she was a prostitute. The guy who rented the place to her knew that she was a prostitute. It's just like he's either, as mentioned in the episode, he's either oblivious or an idiot. Do I want to go into that? 3rd of May, they were looking for another place. Did I put this one in? I was going to do a whole section about the landlord, but I've mentioned him. I might do that in the next episode. Let's see how that goes. Let's not ruin that. Stanley. The following day, Monday the 4th of May. Hang on, I've done that bit. On Monday, I left her at the flat at 6 p.m. and by appointment, I met her at the Tatler Theatre on Charing Cross Road, which is pretty much where the Montague Pike is now, at 10 p.m. and I took her to have supper at the Alhambra Cafe on Leicester Square. So there used to be, where the Moon Under the Water is on Leicester Square, used to be the Alhambra Theatre, but that's long since demolished. I left her at 11 p.m. Let me dive down and see if... Let's go nearer to the stuff that happened on the day and see what he says. That stuff about the finding... See, it's all very odd. Everything about Stanley is really odd. The whole thing with the key... I try not to overemphasize this because if you don't have to. I've tried to do this slightly different, but if you go back to episode 4, where I originally did... the murder of Dutch Leah, I kind of go into more details about the key and the way it's kind of done and stuff like that. But it's weird, isn't it? There's one key to the house, one key to he can't get access to the street door. She only has the key to that. She has the key to the flat door, so he can't get in either way. He has to wait outside. And you just think, why not just spend a tiny bit of money just to get an extra key? It's all dubious to me. It all seems like a convenient excuse to say, oh, I couldn't have got into the flat because I didn't have a key. And then, I had to wait outside for all these hours, and then I bumped into a guy who I kind of know and said, oh, I can't get into my flat. My girlfriend's in there and she won't let me in. Oh, and then he had to break down the door. It's just dubious. But... it doesn't mean that he definitely committed a murder. It could just mean he could be trying to protect the fact that he's pouncing off her money. He's trying to save himself from getting quite what would be a relatively quite embarrassing a charge, criminal charge. What else we got? Finding the discharge papers. I have to be careful how I say that. When I was reading this, it's really horrible to say, but it's a seaman's discharge book. But if you say it wrong, it comes across as seaman's discharge book. It's like, it sounds like a book that someone's wanking in. So I had to be really cautious about a seaman's discharge book. It's like, even with the word seaman as well, it makes it even worse. So yeah, we don't know if the seaman's discharge book even exists. We don't know. He said that he found a blue raincoat on top of the cupboard. The landlord, who had left some shit in the flat, which we will dive into more next week. He said he had left a raincoat in there, but it was a fawn-coloured one. So whether that was the landlord's or not, we don't know. Leah did seem to say, well, Stanley said that Leah said the discharge book and the blue raincoat belonged to the man who she was trying to hide from that night in the Caprice Club. Whether that is true or not, we don't know. We've got more to dive in with Stanley next week, so that's why I'm being really hesitant about this. Let's see, because you never know. We might need to go back and use some of all this again. Don't want to give away that. We'll dive into some more of a kind of bits in our back history as well that may prove useful. Stanley's second statement. Oh no, I can't use that one either. It's the next episode, because throughout what I've tried to make it clear is, you can't really trust what's written in the press. When you open up these true crime books and have a look at the sources at the back, and you'll see mostly just sources of Daily Mail, the Times, the Guardian, like that, and people are like impressed because the fact they're using like 10 or 20 or 30 newspaper sources. But as I've tried to prove with this, you can't really trust everything that's out there. And even worse is, even though I'm using things like the original police records, what I'm trying to get across as well is, just because someone said they saw something, it doesn't mean that's how it happened. We all have perceptions. We all have reasons for saying the things we want to say. So just because someone said, oh, this is what happened, doesn't mean that's what happened. So we dive into even more about that next week, about how with French Fifi, because there wasn't a lot of press coverage, the police got a limited number of witness statements, but those they got were relatively useful. Do you know, it was quite clear and consistent. But by the time you get to Dutch Leah, because the press is all over this, what it does is by the time the police turn up and kind of get witness statements from those who say they saw it, what they've seen has already been clouded by what they've read in the press, because they believe that what they're reading in the press is true. But what I'm showing you here is what's written in the press is not true. Or, you know, sometimes it can be true, sometimes it can be defective, sometimes they may twist little details. There's some interesting things that will crop up next week, which I hope will make you look at it and go, okay, if they say that, I can see how they've changed those little words, and those little words mean a lot, and it really kind of messes up everything. So, yeah, I don't want to ruin too much of this. Let's not do any more of this. I'm just cautious of not cocking it up by ruining, because I haven't written next week's episode yet. Let's go back and do the quiz questions, the quizzies. Okay, here we go. Whew, my throat is almost sore now. Right. Oh, I'm looking forward to pancakes as well. I bet I won't have any. Question number 1. In what part of East London was Leah born? That was in East Ham. Question number 2. What did her dad Gordon do as a job? He was a miner, although he says mining engineer. Question number 3. In what town was Stanley King born? It's Aldershot. Question number 4. What was Stanley's stage name? Even up until the 1950s, when he was still performing, it was Rex Gordon. Question number 5. On what street did Stanley and Leah first move in together? That was Little Pulteney Street. And Little Pulteney Street is the eastern edge of Brewer Street, which kind of joins Wardour Street, and then immediately opposite is Old Compton Street. So they were at number 1 Pulteney Street, Little Pulteney Street. They moved to 66 Old Compton Street. So effectively they moved 5 houses, which I still find very dubious. Question number 6. In which 2 counties was Leah placed into a care home? They were in Devon and Cornwall. Question number 7. What was the colour of Leah's handbag? It was black. I'm glad I remember that, because I hadn't written that down. Question number 8. What was the name of the coffee stand where Stanley said he got a cup of coffee from before he found Leah's body? It was Jack's. Question number 9. Emilio Plantino worked at what casino? It was the London Casino, which is on Old Compton Street. It's more on the eastern edge, on the corner of, I think it's on the corner of Greek Street, and I think it originally called the Prince Edward Theatre. They then changed it. They opened it up and it was ornate, and then they realised it was the wrong time to open a theatre, so they turned it into a casino, and then years later they turned it back into the Prince Edward Theatre. Not named after Prince Edward as in Prince Edward, but the original Prince Edward. Well, not the original one, the one from the 30s. And question number 10. At the back of what theatre did Leah pick up her punters? That was the Palace Theatre, which is on the corner of Cambridge Circus and intersects with Romilly Street and Greek Street. So that is the theatre where Harry Potter and the cursed arsehole, or whatever it's called, the cursed cash-in of, you need to spend more money on this shite. That's there to pretty much right by the Coach and Horses. Hey, good pub. So there we go. That's that done. I'm knackered. By jingo. Good. So that's that done. That sounded derogatory. That's made it sound like it's good that it was over. It is good that it's over, because that means I can get editing, and it will only take 2.5 days to edit this. Oh my God, why didn't I come up with an easier way to make a podcast? Right, that's me done. Time to drink my tea, which I won't drink, and go to Starbucks and abuse their really shit Wi-Fi. Anyway, thank you for listening to Murder Mile. Obviously, we got part 6 of 10 next week. So have yourselves a good one. Stay safe and be good. Lots of love.